My name is Joan Leslie McGill, and I'm the Chief of Staff here at U.S. Israel Education Association, or USIEA. And we have a fantastic guest speaker for you all today. His name is Congressman Brandon Williams, and he will be joining us soon. I know you all got the delayed time start for today. The House of Representatives called an extra round of votes. And so it delayed our start time, and he actually is still tied up with votes, but we have word from his office that he is coming. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off, and we will be waiting for him to join us any moment now. But welcome to our quarterly Citadel Builders webinar. Our Citadel Builders is our monthly giving program, our group of faithful donors that give every month to our work here at USIEA. And then we've also asked a couple of our other close partners and investors to join us this morning to hear an update on the work that we're doing at USIEA. And again, to get that insider look at our congressional tour that we took this past spring that Congressman Williams was a part of. So I just want to take a moment to thank and honor all of you that are a part of this work at USIEA. We cannot do it without you. And I think that you will find Congressman Williams' stories and his insight into our tour to just be very rewarding, that we are all in this together, and there is such a large impact coming out of the work here at USIEA. And I also see some new faces on here, so I don't want to take for granted that everyone knows that work that we're doing. So USIEA is an education nonprofit. We educate members of Congress and senior government leaders on the U.S.-Israel relationship and ways to build that critical collaboration. And if you are following what's happening in the news, then you know that now it is more important than it's ever been to ensure that we have a strong U.S.-Israel collaboration. I think you'll be very encouraged by Congressman Williams not only talking about what he saw on the USIEA tour, but to hear that our members of Congress and the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate really are carrying the torch for Israel right now. There is a lot of news and a lot of noise around that, but I am always encouraged when I hear from these elected officials that their support for Israel really is unwavering, and that is the overwhelming amount of our elected officials. They really are supporting Israel in that way, and it is an unwavering commitment. So I think you will be encouraged all around to hear from him today. And I would like to start just talking about the congressional tour while we are waiting on Congressman Williams to join us. So at USIEA, we have three main pillars of our work. We have an ongoing presence on Capitol Hill. We have staff that are up there that are constantly in and out of members of Congress's offices, working with members, staff, congressional committees, providing the essential research, and really pioneering a lot of the collaboration between the U.S. and Israel. We view our role as bringing forth new pioneering ideas, things that people aren't thinking about any right now, and how we can progress forward in building the U.S.-Israel relationship. So very active on Capitol Hill. In addition, we have our thought leadership pillar. So just being an active spokesperson in the media and in the general public about Israel, really correcting the narrative and the false perceptions around Israel that has proliferated our society today. So we've had a stream of op-eds, especially ramping up since the war that started on October 7th. And that thought leadership pillar has really grown. And then the third pillar is our congressional tours, our flagship program that we started in 2011. We have now led 8 congressional tours to Israel. That's 40 members of Congress that have been with us. It's bipartisan. We take members across the aisle. It's bicameral, House and Senate leaders. And we really do focus on those senior leaders in Congress that are leading the committees that are most relevant to Israel, most relevant in the foreign policy world. So that third pillar of the congressional tours really is our staple. It's how we started, and everything else comes from that. So I'll briefly give an overview of this congressional tour that we took in 2024. So we take one congressional tour a year, our annual trip, and we were there at the end of March this year. We had 4 senior leaders in Congress, 3 members from the House, and 1 senator that were with us, as well as several congressional staff members. And we were there during wartime. It was a different trip than anything we've ever taken before. You know, we've done COVID, we've done lots of different types of conflict, but we've never been there during wartime. And it was an extraordinary experience for all of us that were involved. And I could specifically tell for the members of Congress that it impacted them in a deep way. Each of the members that were on our trip had been to Israel before, whether as an elected and official or before serving in their current capacity, but they had all been to Israel, but they will agree that they had never seen Israel from the perspective that we were able to provide, and especially during wartime. So typically with our USIEA tours, we focus a lot on the West Bank area. That is our area of expertise. It is our bread and butter at USIEA. We were the first privately funded tour to go into the West Bank with members of Congress, and that was in 2011, and we've continued that work since then. So we definitely had our West Bank focus as we normally do, but of course, obviously, there was a greater focus on Gaza and the southern area of Israel, as well as the north. So I'll just give you a brief snapshot of our day down at the Gaza border. We trekked down there and we were able to visit some of the moshavs and the kibbutzes that were affected on October 7th, as well as the Nova Festival site. All of these places have unfortunately become well known and famous for what happened on October 7th, which was such a tragedy. And to see it firsthand was unlike anything that I had ever experienced. It felt like we were witnessing history to be there in the season right after October 7th. And so we were able to go tour kibbutz Nir Oz, which is one of the smaller kibbutzes that's along the Gaza border. But it was, they had the highest hostage and murder rate per capita than any other kibbutz on October 7th. So the majority of their kibbutz community and members were either taken hostage or murdered that day. We were given a tour by one of the kibbutz leaders who actually had been out of the country on October 7th, but all of his family members were there that morning, and his son was taken hostage, and they still do not know his current status. As of November, when that first hostage release happened, there was word that he was alive at that time, but they still don't know at this point where he is or what has happened to him since November. And so you can imagine you have this community leader who's not only over the whole kibbutz, but his son has been taken hostage. He has no idea what's happened to him. And he is taking us house to house on the kibbutz, telling us the story of each family that owned each home and what happened to them on the morning of October 7th. And it was gruesome, tragic details, things that you wouldn't believe that kind of evil exists today. But he was able to tell us each family's story, which made it such a personal experience. It's one thing when you read numbers or you read broad reports in the news, but to get that family experience, house to house, what happened to each person, it really hits at home, and it makes it so personal in a way that I just, like I said, I felt like I was witnessing a piece of history, a sad and tragic piece of our history, but important nonetheless to witness. And from Nir Oz, we then went to the Nova Festival site, where we were able to hear from one of the survivors who was there that day, a beautiful 20-year-old Jewish girl from the area. And she had been there with her boyfriend, and they hid out for 5 hours in a bomb shelter with 40 other people, being taunted and really just taunted by the Hamas terrorists that were provoking them. They were standing outside of the bomb shelter, throwing in grenades and shrapnel and gas bombs, and they did this to them for 5 hours. And of the 40 people that were in the bomb shelter, only 10 survived. 30 of them were killed that day. And she said a comment that I will never forget as long as I live. She said, when I was in the bomb shelter and they were throwing all of this stuff inside to try to get us to come out, I had the thought, and it was such a moment of clarity in the midst of such confusion and chaos, that if you are a Jew and you're in a tight dark space with gas, you know you're being holocausted. And that was one of the most powerful comments I heard on the entire trip. And it stuck with me, and I know it stuck with the members of Congress that were with us, that we cannot make any mistake for what October 7th was. It was an all-out calculated attack against the Jewish people, and that anything else, trying to make it into anything else is a grave disservice to the people that were there that day and what they went through. And so I do believe that our members of Congress that were on the trip were able to walk away with greater clarity for what that day was, and therefore empowered with knowledge on how to move forward. So how can they go back to the halls of Congress, to their colleagues, and use their influence for good? How can we make sure that the United States government is continuing to support Israel with funding, with weapons, with diplomacy? How can we be an advocate for Israel on the international stage? I think we've seen that become an even greater issue than it's ever been before. So I really saw it impact these members and equip them to do their jobs better. And then finally, last thing I'll say, and then I'll open it up for conversation. I think we're still waiting on Congressman Williams, and I apologize for the delay, but that's just Congress. Last thing I'll say is we were able to travel to the northern border. We were able to go up to the Golan Heights and get a vantage point looking right out into Syria. We were able to hear from an amazing expert. Many of you have actually heard from him before, whether in Israel with us or on previous webinars, but his name is Alon Shulman. He is a IDF reservist, and he serves in the intelligence unit. And he gave a brilliant briefing on the larger geopolitical dynamics in the area. So it's obviously a very hostile neighborhood, and he was able to break down all of the different threats that Israel faces on all sides, but specifically in the north, and the Russian influence in the area, obviously the Iranian influence in the area. And it was very, very interesting. And the members of Congress always say that he is the top expert that they hear from on these trips. And they've actually invited him to come speak to some of their colleagues on Capitol Hill. And then we also were able to travel a little bit further west along the border, and we got an incredible briefing on specifically on the Lebanese front and Hezbollah and the threat that they pose. And that was in late March, early April. And so we've only seen escalation on the northern front since then. I read a report from that same group that gave us the briefing that May saw the highest escalation in Hezbollah rockets coming into Israel than any prior month since October 7th. So we're definitely seeing that escalation. And I know many of you are following this closely, so you know these facts and details. But I think, again, just to bring it home to the work that USIEA is doing, taking members of Congress there is the key. It's one thing to, read about it in the news, hear about it in the news. They even receive, obviously, the top intelligence briefings of anyone here in the US. However, taking them to see it on the ground firsthand makes it so much more real. It becomes a reality to them. And like I said, putting them in touch with those experts that then they can take back to Capitol Hill, have their other colleagues hear about it. It really does change the game. So that is a brief primer on our trip to Israel. And I had hoped Congressman Williams would be on with us at this point, but I'd like to open it up for questions. Many of you, like I said, are friends. You've been in this with us for a while, but I do see a couple of new faces. So I'd like to open it up for questions at this point while we're waiting on Congressman Williams, just about our trip to Israel, the congressional tour, any of the other work that we're doing right now at USIEA. So please feel free to ask us some questions.
Hey, Joe and Leslie, this is Paul Nagorotsky. Just any updates on the FDA move to have a branch in Israel or the Middle East?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. So at USIEA, we have been working on an important initiative that one second, Paul. I just got word that Congressman Williams has joined us. 1 second. I'll circle back to it. Do we have him on?
Not quite. He's actually on his way back from votes right now. We're just getting things set up for him, but he'll be here in a couple minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Then continue answering your question, Paul. So at USIEA, we have been working on an initiative to friend-shore the United States critical pharmaceutical supply lines out of China. We saw during COVID that a lot of our supply chains were getting tied up there, and at any moment, China could just turn off the tap and keep us from getting Tylenol, ADHD medicine, MRI contrast, you name it, the gamut of our critical pharmaceutical supplies could be held up in China. And so we took that information and we said, we've got to diversify. We've got to get out of China. So where do we go? Let's look at Israel and the Abraham Accords nations as a ripe area for us to tap into their pharmaceutical and medical device expertise. And therefore, we're getting out of China. We are building stronger alliances in the Middle East. We're really capitalizing off of that Abraham Accords diplomatic ties and really supporting Israel in that way. So we started out doing that a couple of years ago. And where we are now is there was some legislation that was introduced back in January by Representatives Diana Harshbarger and Juan Vargas. It was a bipartisan bill, and both of them had been to Israel with us last year on our 2023 Congressional Tour. And they took a lot of the information that and the research that we had done, and they turned it into this phenomenal piece of legislation to establish an FDA bureau in the Abraham Accords region. And once you have an FDA housed there, it will open up the region for collaboration, for working with the US to get approvals and expediting that process. And so we have been aiding them in that research since then. And where it stands right now is the bill was introduced in January, and the House Energy and Commerce Committee is planning to mark up that bill this summer in order to get it into appropriations. So they're aiming towards getting that bureau funded in fiscal year 2025. So there's a lot more behind that in the nitty-gritty of the legislative process, but all that to say it's definitely moving forward. Parallel tracks between the House Energy and Commerce Committee and the Appropriations Committee under that Agriculture Subcommittee, which has jurisdiction over the FDA. So it's making its way through Congress, through all of their procedural hurdles and checklists, but the goal is to have funding for the Bureau in FY 2025, which will be an incredible reality for us to see. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, great. Well, Congressman Williams' team, can you guys give us a quick countdown of how long to expect? Okay. They may just be waiting on him to get back. Well, we've done a lot of recapping of where USIEA has been. I'd love to do some forecasting of where we are going. So we are in the midst of a huge growth season at USIEA. And I hope that encourages those of you that are faithful partners in all of this, because we want to continue growing. We want to continue spreading our network. Of course, we are looking to hire somebody on Capitol Hill full-time to help run some of our operations up there. I've got one of my colleagues on here, EJ Kimball. He's our Capitol Hill presence right now, our Director of Policy and Strategic Operations up there. We are looking to add to him one more full-time position up there. And we're looking forward to that. We're also looking forward to hiring someone potentially in Israel to be a counterpart to them, to really be working in the Knesset and working with some of the government leaders there. So we are just adding to our research engine. We're adding to our thought leaders and our experts in different areas, looking at who can help us on defense, who can help us on healthcare, who can help us in all of these different areas. We're also providing and putting out white papers at a new rate that we never have before. So we have just put out a white paper on the AGES Fund. That is the Alternate Gaza Education System Fund. So for those of you that have read a lot about UNRWA, we defunded UNRWA, that United Nations Relief and Works Agency that was pouring money into Gaza and actually funding Hamas and some of the work that they were doing. And so we've created this alternate Gaza education system to come in post-war and serve as that alternative for the education system. So how can we de-radicalize the Palestinian population in Gaza? How can we educate them towards peaceful coexistence with Israelis? How can we get in there and reform the curriculum and the textbooks, train teachers so that they're also having that education towards peaceful coexistence? So that is a huge aspect of what we're working on right now in context of the war in Gaza, helping our little piece to prepare for the day after. And we've gotten great feedback, great reception to this white paper. There are a lot of people that are excited about it on Capitol Hill and really believe that it can help pave some of that path forward post-war. And then we are also looking towards putting out a white paper. So you guys are kind of getting the inside scoop right here, a white paper on the artificial intelligence collaboration between the United States and Israel. So we are looking at AI. It's kind of taking over our world as we know it right now, for better or for worse. And there's not a lot of regulation on it right now. And so we are looking at how the US can work with our allies, knowing that some of our adversaries are also going to be using and even weaponizing AI. How can we in the United States work with our allies to build regulation, but also collaboration? How can we work with Israel, who has truly an artificial intelligence hub there? It's such a small country, but we know that as the startup nation, and that extends to their work in AI. A great example is a pharmaceutical company or a biomedical pharmaceutical company that we have introduced members of Congress to on our trips, called Biologic, and they are putting AI into cancer and chemotherapy drugs so that the AI can know to attack just the cancerous cells inside of a patient, and it doesn't affect any of the healthy cells, which we know is what contributes to the negative side effects in chemotherapy. And so it's just amazing cutting edge technology that they're working on using AI. And so we are looking to tap into that and build that US-Israel collaboration on the artificial intelligence front. So that is another area that we are getting into. We have a white paper that we actually just finished this morning. I got the final version on my desk today. So you guys will see that dropping soon through our emails. We would love to provide you with that education. And we're also going to be socializing it on Capitol Hill with members of Congress. So those are some of the things that we have to look forward to. We really are growing. We're looking at, the future. It's very difficult to tell at this time what's going to happen in the US and in Israel. We're anticipating, obviously, a US presidential election. We are anticipating an ongoing war in the north in Israel, even once they wrap up in Gaza. And then, of course, the instability within the Israeli political system as well. So there's a lot of unknown, but at USIEA, we really prize ourselves on being the ones that can look ahead and try to plan for the future, also working across the aisle in the US and then with all different political factions in Israel. And that's where you really see the growth. So that's some of where we're going. And I got a 5-minute heads up from Congressman Williams' team 5 minutes ago. So I'll let you guys turn on the camera when you're ready. But then I also got a question on here from Micah Salzman. Micah, it's good to have you on. You asked if we can distribute a bill number for the friendshoring legislation so that you can send in your support to your representatives. Yes, so that is HR 7155. And I will put that in the chat box, HR 7155. And that is the FDA Bureau legislation that Representatives Harshbarger and Vargas have put out. Thank you for the question, Micah. All right. Any other questions or comments at this time while we're waiting? We should be ready to go in just a minute. There we go. Hey, Congressman Williams. Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Does that work?
That's it. It's great to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Did you just run across the Capitol from votes?
I ran through the tunnels by the art exhibit.
Yes, you can take a sip of your water and take a deep breath. We're so thankful to have you on today. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you.
Likewise, good to see you.
Yes, I was just giving everyone a little bit of background on our congressional tour to Israel back in March. We really enjoyed traveling with you and your wonderful wife, Stephanie. That's also an interesting piece of our congressional tours at USIEA, is we love for the members of Congress to bring their spouses with them. And so really enjoyed getting to know both of you on a personal basis. You guys are incredible. And so I would just love to ask you a little bit about your experience on the trip. I know you had been to Israel before, but that was before you had been elected to Congress, right?
Sorry.
So this was your first trip as an elected official to Israel. What was it like to be there during wartime?
Well, and I'll answer that from a broader perspective. It was my fourth or fifth trip to Israel. I was baptized in the Jordan River at age 12, been to Masada twice. I've taken my family there years ago, and I've been there for business many years ago. But what's different about this trip, and particularly in the current events in Israel, is you felt like you were experiencing not just the past of Israel, the history, which of course people go there for, but you were experiencing, really the transformation that's happening in Israel today. And then, because of the forces that are at work there, you felt like you were seeing also the future of Israel unfolding. And I've never had that sort of three-dimensional experience. It's always been really, frankly, about business, about what's going on today, or about the past, and it being the Holy Land. So that's how I try to describe it, is really a three-dimensional view, and past, present, and future. In wartime, you see a people, a civilization that is fighting an existential battle for its survival. And that produces a focus, a seriousness that we don't experience, honestly, in the United States, because we frankly live in such security. But it is, they fight to maintain normalcy. So in terms of walking around and enjoying being out to dinner and all the things that make up normal life, they fight very hard to protect. And that's one experience that's maybe counterintuitive of what you might find in a nation that is, literally under such incredible threat. So anyway, hopefully that's enough, but that's my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a good point that you make. And we hear about this a lot, that the United States has the privilege of having, two allies on our borders and then oceans on the other two borders. And so we can't fully understand or comprehend the threat that Israel is under on a daily basis, living in the region that they live in. And I was telling everyone right before you hopped on that we traveled on our trip to Israel, down from the Gaza border all the way to the very north to the Golan Heights and to the Lebanese border. So I'd love for you to expound on that a little bit more, what you heard on both ends of Israel and what they're facing in the larger context of the region.
Well, I first want to point out that America's shores are guarded by a very powerful Navy, of which I'm a veteran. So I just got to put that plug in for the Navy. But the experience on my visit to Israel, seeing firsthand the terrorists, the sites of the terrorist massacres at Nero's and the Nova Music Festival, is unlike anything. I'll remember that my entire life, because it's such a poignant experience of the witnesses that were there. And I think it's important to bear witness to that I carry that within me as well. When we're voting on support for Israel, that is clear in my mind and not an abstract idea. Of course, you hear the artillery, on a steady basis down by the Gaza border. This is, of course, before the Rafah activities, in the heightened activities down in the south there in Gaza. But you really see the presence of the military much more pronounced than you would see in Tel Aviv or even in Jerusalem or anywhere else. But then when you go all the way up to the Golan you are literally looking into Syria, and the towns that you can clearly see in Syria, the mosques there have been taken over by Iranian, influence that have taken over the religious mosques there. That just out of sight are numerous Russian bases. So Russia and Iran are, really in control of Syria to a large extent, and which is very chilling because that's not natural. It's not natural from a historical perspective. It's not natural from a, frankly, even from a religious perspective, that the Shias would be there instead of the Sunni population. So it's very frightening. But then when you go over, to the Lebanon border, you just get the sense of how close the threat is from Hezbollah. And, the number of rockets, particularly precision guided rockets from the Hezbollah militias that are aimed at Israel have forced this evacuation of tens of thousands of people from Golan and from the border in the north. And that's a huge human cost. And so we actually got to experience that, and whole communities that have been displaced because they are under rocket fire every day from these militias. But it's really the drones and the rockets and the precision guided weapons. You get the sense that because Hezbollah has now infiltrated the demilitarized zone and have crowded up close to the border, that this is really an existential threat for Israel. And Hezbollah, of course, is 5 times more capable than Hamas. And everyone knows that Hezbollah is the real threat. So again, that's what we got to experience. And, you're looking at it. You're not looking at it on a map. You're not watching it on TV. Looking from a high point directly into, these threats that face Israel.
Absolutely. And going off of that, we mentioned the southern border and the northern border, but there is a third front of interest and importance right now, which is inside of the West Bank. And so we did spend some time inside of the West Bank. And I don't think that you can talk about the war in Gaza in a vacuum without acknowledging the larger dynamics at play here in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I'd love to know, how did this trip inform the way you look at the conflict now overall? And how do you see peace playing out at this point?
Well, we all pray for peace. There was a ceasefire in place on October 6th of last year, and it was broken viciously and cynically by Hamas on October 7th. And so all of the action and war taking place right now is solely the responsibility of Hamas and Iran. They're the ones that broke the ceasefire. So how do we get back to a ceasefire? And I think that's you have to defeat Hamas. And unfortunately, you're going to have, the Israeli army is going to have to occupy Gaza, to prevent a resurgence of Hamas. And there's going to be a long process of rebuilding, of course, and humanitarian action in the in Gaza. But the West Bank is also has a very active Israeli military presence, because there are many of these terrorist organizations are always trying to increase their foothold in the West Bank. They are trying to arm themselves and smuggle weapons in so that they can conduct operations in the West Bank against Israeli cities, predominantly Jewish cities that are there. And this is a place where they have to live in peace and cohabitation, which of course is very challenging in the best of times, and especially challenging right now. So the path to peace, I had the opportunity to brief the Israeli War College here in DC about 3 weeks ago when they were visiting. And, you know, my thoughts are that you have to defeat Hamas, and that's the path towards peace. The other big part, of course, is maintaining deterrence against Iran. You know, there's three elements of deterrence. There is capability, there's credibility, and then there's communication. So the three C's. Iran, of course, is making progress on its nuclear, you know, on its nuclear capabilities, its nuclear weapon capabilities, which is great concern for me and my background, because that's, of course, was the nature of my service on submarines. And you know, it's possible that Iran perhaps, I don't know this, but perhaps has, you know, the capability to build a nuclear bomb. But in order to be credible, in order to be a credible threat, you actually have to be capable. So building a bomb is one part, but you got to be able to deliver it. And Iran, of course, fired 350 rockets at Israel, and only 1 out of 100 made it to actually strike Israeli territory. Meanwhile, of course, it's always a bit of a mystery whether Israel has nuclear weapon capability or not. They make that ambiguous, which I think is a good strategic choice. But Israel made one strike on Iran and successfully completed it. And so when you think about the ability to deliver a strike, you know, I think Israel's doing a very good job of deterring Iran. And I think it's important to look at the, you know, failure of the Iranian missile strikes against Israel, not just as a sigh of relief, but also as a warning to Iran that even if you have a nuclear weapon, it's not likely that you can deliver it. And if Israel is able to strike in return, they will be able to strike anywhere and anytime they want. And those are the elements of deterrence. And deterrence is always cheaper than war. And so, you know, Israel has done an excellent job of conveying that kind of capability and credibility in their deterrence. And there's no question how clear their communication is. So these are the things that I'm watching, you know, more specifically about a lasting peace, and deterrence of Iran, of course, is a big part of that.
Absolutely. I love those three C's. That's easy to understand and easy to remember. And you're right. It is in the larger context with Iran, and also how the United States can step up and play a role in that diplomatically. But also, you know, with Congress, you've got the power of the purse. You are funding a lot of Israel's defense systems. And so at this point, there's been a lot that the U.S. Congress has done for Israel since October 7th. I am so extremely proud of our Congress and the way you all have supported Israel during this time. Looking forward, what policies or legislation can you all in Congress enact to continue to support Israel? What are you guys looking at right now?
Well, the most important thing actually is outside of Congress, which is a change in leadership in the United States. And that's perhaps the most important thing, to assure that there is strong support and consistent support for Israel. I think Congress has been very frustrated by the inconsistent support. Another, I think, thing that Congress needs to do is by decoupling and debundling support for Israel and Ukraine and, you know, these other priorities, we were able to get through and push through the financial support that was necessary and frankly long overdue. And I advocated very strongly to the Speaker Johnson privately that we needed to debundle these and do these as a one standalone bills. And so working in the background, I hopefully was a voice of reason so that we could actually depoliticize the support for Israel, get it on the floor, and get it passed. And so I'm very thankful that that happened. Looking forward, I think it is making sure that we keep the executive branch consistent and following through on the will of Congress, and providing the aid that we have authorized and designated. And so, that's really the focus, I think, of what we're trying to achieve now.
Absolutely. I have a question from somebody that's on with us that I would love to ask you. So what is being done right now to get the U.S. citizens back that are being held hostage in Gaza?
I'm not in those committees, and so I'm not directly privy to that. But it doesn't seem to be a priority of the Biden administration whatsoever. And I can't think of any other time in American history where 8 American hostages, 8 Americans would be held hostage and there be virtually no singular effort to go get them. American special forces have retrieved American hostages from all kinds of places, from all over the world, and we're very capable of it. And I see no effort on the part of the Biden administration to do that. Any of the aid that has been offered to Gaza, none of it has been tied to the release of American hostages, which seems like the bare minimum is to get our people home. And I only have one word for that, and that's shameful. I don't have a better word for it that's polite anyways.
Well, thank you. It definitely has been a tough season all the way around. Again, before you hopped on, we were talking about the unknown in the U.S. political world with our elections this year, and then, of course, on the Israeli side and their political system. But overall, it has not been a perfect effort, but overall, there has just been so much support for Israel during this time. And, it made me think about something as we were talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the future for peace. It made me think about something that we had heard from Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, when we met with him in Israel. And he said that he has never been so hopeful for peace between Israelis and Palestinians as he is right now. The past 30 years of disillusionment over the Oslo Accords, he feels the most hopeful for peace right now, which I thought was an interesting comment. Do you remember him saying that to us, Congressman Williams?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I sure do. I think one of the great tragedies of the Palestinian people is the leadership of the PLO and now of Hamas. These are not only terrorist organizations, but they're essentially criminal organizations, and they have stolen billions and billions and billions of dollars from the Palestinian people by being the middlemen of well-intentioned foreign aid. And it's the Palestinian people that have suffered under this kind of leadership, if you can call it that. And, how is it that can be broken? And sadly, it's going to come at great cost, the cost of this war. And, but I do hope that there is, much better leadership, enlightened leadership that's actually serving and working for the Palestinian people. That would be a great blessing for the security of Israel, but it'd be an even greater blessing for the prosperity, security, and health of the Palestinian people. And I'd love to see that.
I agree. I'm right there with you. And that has been a large portion of USIEA's work prior to October 7th, is building an integrated business vision between Israelis and Palestinians, and building that grassroots economic movement where if you start with business, you really do have a basis for peace. And we saw that have a lot of success. And not to say that that vision has died by any means. It's just seen some setbacks since October 7th. But I tend to agree with Minister Dermer that I believe that the prospect of peace is stronger now because I think we've shattered some of the illusions around the peace process that we had prior to October 7th.
Well, as they say in Gaza, inshallah, God willing.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Well, my last question for you, and thank you so much for your time, is just what would you say if you could distill your whole experience down from being in Israel with us? What is your key takeaway from your tour with USIEA to Israel?
Well, it was life-changing for Stephanie and I. There are certain things that you can only experience in person. But to experience it in person at this particular moment in history, and from the perspective as a member of Congress, which I never imagined before that I would ever have been in Congress. So all of these things are overwhelming to us. It has, I'll go back to my 3D analogy. It's made me see Israel in 3 dimensions, past, present, and future. And the future, of course, is, it's about the economy, it's about peace, it's about security. And that was very, very powerful for us. I'm now reading the book that was recommended to me, a recommendation I received on this trip called My Promised Land. And it really recounts the modern history of Israel. And I have found it incredibly insightful. To appreciate the challenges and also to appreciate the incredible success of the nation of Israel. So I just keep immersing myself in it. And I don't think I would have taken all of those steps or had that perspective had I not gone on that trip.
Wow. Well, thank you. Like I said, I really enjoyed getting to know you and Stephanie on a personal basis. I want to thank you for your service to our country, first in the Navy and now as an elected official. I feel like I've gotten an up-close vantage point that our members of Congress are the true definition of servant leaders. You all are serving in the high place, but there's a lot of personal sacrifice involved. And so I just want to thank you for everything that you're doing for our country and to support Israel.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you to everyone else for making the time to be with us. It's so great to see all of your faces and your names on here. And please always feel free to reach out to us via the website or email. And we look forward to connecting with all of you at our next quarterly webinar. Stay tuned for more details. Thank you, everyone.